Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Empower Sounds podcast. My name is Mahika, and this podcast is all about sharing the inspiring stories of women from all walks of life, delving into the mindsets and missions behind their successes, their journeys, and everything in between. Today is the final episode of the first season, which is so exciting. And we've come so far since the season launched in August, and I'm so excited to close the season off with Farah Nanji, a brilliant DJ, race car driver, TED speaker, podcast host of the Mission Makers podcast, a podcast which I co-produced with her for 5 months this year, and also my incredible mentor who helped me start this podcast and create it into what it is. Farah is one of the most incredible people I've had the privilege to speak with, and I really hope you enjoy this conversation and get as much out of it as I did. Stay tuned, please rate and review the show, and let me know what you want for the next season. Stay till the end to hear when it's going to come out and what's going to be involved. Amazing. Farah, welcome to the Empower Sounds podcast. I want to start by talking about your DJ career. So can you please tell me about how you got started as a DJ, what inspired you to pursue a career in music, and who some of your biggest influences are?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm so excited to see your show grow and get off the ground. So, your first question was what inspired me to become a DJ?
Yes.
Yeah, so I started going out in London probably a bit before I should have really been going out. My first club was Fabric, age 15. I'd been collecting records, since a really young age. I'd been listening to Buddha Bar since I was like 10. I even became a member of Fabric at the time. They had this thing called Fabric First, where obviously I couldn't go to the club age 10, but I was getting, as a member, I was getting CDs, compilations, that they were sending out. And of course, the internet at that time was just starting to become a really big and revolutionary thing. And for me, it was this whole, incredible exploration of music and cultures. And the first time that I sort of went on to the dance floor, hearing the power of a kick drum played on the Fabric Room One sound system was just like a life-changing moment. As well as kind of the diversity and the openness and inclusiveness of the dance floor, which, there's no sort of judgment. Everyone's kind of in a state of flow, and the DJ's got this incredible hold on the audience and taking everyone through a journey. And I kind of, felt extremely gravitated to that DJ booth. And at that time, being a DJ was like figuring out how to be a rock star. There wasn't any sort of schools, there wasn't any kind of YouTube videos. It was a very elusive and mysterious kind of thing. In fact, didn't even think it was a career path. But I started hanging out with the DJs who sort of took me under their wings. A lot of them recognized my taste for music. And along the way, they taught me a lot. And for about 3 or 4 years, I was in their DJ booths just observing, seeing how they had this incredible command and control of the audience. And aged 18, it was no longer enough for me to just share music to those people. I really wanted to learn it for myself. And so I enrolled in Point Blank, and that's a music school where, as you may know, I now lecture. So things have come full circle. But yeah, I enrolled in the DJ course. And because I'd been going out, I had like quite a strong network in London, and I was already being offered like residencies and gigs, while I was studying for DJing. So yeah, it was that's kind of how I started. It was also born from a place of, a very, very tough educational system that I was enrolled in, for my high school, and where creativity wasn't really encouraged. And there was a lot of judgment and a lot of pressure to sort of be an A-star student and go to Oxford and Cambridge and all that stuff. And that was, to me, that's what was presented as the life path. But when I got to the clubs, I saw a whole other world. And yeah, here I am more than 10 years later.
That's amazing. It sounds like an incredible journey. I want to unpack some of the things that you just said. Let's start with what made you decide to focus on electronic music. Like you said previously, there's a lot of diversity on the dance floor. So what drew you into electronic music specifically?
Yeah, that's a great question. I did sort of, was and still am a fan of other genres. I started learning the first introduction I had to music was actually the Spanish guitar. That's what I sort of grew up learning and really was the safe space for me during, this childhood where there was a lot of bullying and stuff. And that's what really first gave me the first experiences of how music can heal you. But it was just always electronic music for me, even before the clubs. As I said, I was a member of Fabric First. I was getting these CDs. Britain has so much history steeped in electronic music, and I think the interesting thing about electronic music, and especially, now we've really seen it evolve and become such a huge thing where artists, DJs are now taking center stage at Glastonbury, which, wasn't happening for sure 10 years ago. But I think it's like this sort of canvas, right, where you can build a lot of different infusions from different genres. Like you could have, a Spanish guitar lick playing over electronic music, but the beats is what sort of provides that rhythm and that pulsation and I don't know. This is just something that's always fascinated me about how you can really push the boundaries of creativity with electronic music. That it's almost like there are no rules. And as a format, like taking a club and having people being able to experience that on a dance floor, that has always like spoken to me more than being a live performer, in a different way of a different genre. So yeah, I really love the innovation that's constant in electronic music. It's always changing. There's always new things happening. There's always new artists. There are, of course, live shows you can experience. And also there's also the other element of it, which now we're seeing a lot more, is the impact of technology and how you can just create the most incredible audiovisual experience, along with your music. And that to me is really, really exciting.
That is super exciting. Thank you for sharing that. Speaking of all the technology and the creativity involved in making a DJ set and music, can you please walk us through your creative process for preparing a set or creating a mix?
Yeah, for sure. And actually, as you asked me that question, something else I just want to add to your previous question is also this culture of electronic music. I mean, it was born, under a form of resistance towards judgment, of gay people, of colored people. And it's not just been the music, it's always been also a vehicle to stand up for change. And I think that's also been a constant. So that's also something that, I feel quite compelled to with electronic music. Like it is a thermometer for change and for culture. And then in terms of how do I prepare my creative sets, yeah, I mean, the rate of music now and is astonishing, right? Like we have 100,000 new tracks or whatever that come out on Spotify every day, every week, and cutting through that noise is insane. But also keeping up with that pace of the amount of music that comes out when, again, 10 years ago or even 15 years ago, an artist would produce an album and it would be something that they do and they wouldn't need to release anything for another 2 years. Whereas now you're on a cycle of like every 6 to 8 weeks, a new record is coming out from you as an artist, or that's the sort of industry target. And so to keep up with that amount of music as an artist, as a DJ, first and foremost, my job is to kind of collect all these incredible sounds from so many different sources. Like it's not just one source. So part of it is being incredibly organized with your playlists. I tag everything by genre, by sort of feeling, and then I'm always keeping up with what's coming out music wise, just literally listening to music, everywhere from driving to the gym. So many different moments, just always kind of working in the background, listening to what's coming out, and most of it isn't good. Like if I download, I don't know, 1,000 songs, like probably only 10%, if that, is going to be what I really am actually going to play in my set. And yeah, so it's kind of yeah, that organization, and then thinking about the venue, obviously the time that you're performing. If you're playing at 11 p.m., which would be like a warm-up slot, it's going to be very different to if you're playing at 2 a.m., which is more, a peak set time. So sort of knowing what energy is going to be required of you, and obviously you're building this as a journey. So, it starts at a certain BPM or a certain energy point, but of course you want to build on that. And so, yeah, that's part of it. And then I also mix harmonically. So all my tracks are sorted out by their harmonic key, and there's like this cycle that you sort of follow. And, each track before and after, sort of, but either is that same key or is in the complementary key to that particular track, which is a really interesting way of mixing because, again, you could put any genre through that system. But as long as, the key is matched, it's not necessarily about, the genre, then it's you're able to kind of cross genre and cross mix. Which is quite exciting. But yeah, a lot of the success is actually, being there in that moment, because you could obviously do all this preparation, but that the moment is what calls for you to kind of make a decision and maybe go away from a playlist you might have curated and go to something else. Yeah. Hope that sort of gives a little insight.
That's super interesting, and it's super insightful to learn about how much work and time goes into creating a DJ set. I want to ask you, like you mentioned, you're constantly listening to music throughout your day and looking at what you can implement into your sets. How do you make sure that music is still a source of joy and not just like a stress, or I need to finish this song, I need to get through all of this to add to a set? Like, how do you ensure that there's like boundaries in place so that you continue to enjoy your art and it doesn't become a task for you?
For sure, that's a great question. I think, you know, thinking back, there were, when I graduated from university, I music was full time for me. And I think when I look back to that period, it probably was more stressful because it was pretty much 90% of what I was doing. Whereas now I run two businesses that are not in the music industry, and having that difference sort of allows me to not have to be constantly creating all the time in that way. And those two things inspire me to come back to this. They make me look forward to come back to this, and it also puts like a time bound pressure on me to kind of achieve as much as I can in that time frame, because I'm obviously delivering to other things. But it also, if in those moments, in those years where I was full time and I was feeling overwhelmed, I mean, it's the simple things like changing your environment, going out for a walk, getting inspired by nature. Those are the really important things that even to this day, if I did feel, a bit overwhelmed and seeing it just as a job, then those would be the things that I do. But, I think the overwhelmment comes from the amount of stuff that's out there and the fact that you really need to dig hard to find good music. And for me, when I listen to new music, I don't have the time to listen to a whole song for 7 whole minutes. Like I know within 3 seconds whether I'm going to continue listening to this or not. And it's just the speed of having to do that could get monotonous. So having to just change that, like maybe do that for 20 minutes, then go away and do something else and come back to it. That's probably one of the ways I would get through that.
That's super interesting. Thank you for sharing that. You've touched on the challenges of dealing with overwhelm and monotony sometimes. What other challenges have you faced as a DJ and how have you overcome them?
Yeah, that's a big question. I mean, there are a lot of challenges in so many levels. There's, of course, the financial pressure, because this isn't a career path like any other. I mean, you don't normally know, sort of in the beginning stages when you're building out your career, and until you really reach that level of success, which could take 10 years, it could take 20 years, it could take 5 years. It's certainly not something that happens overnight for most people. Until you reach that point, you don't know when you're going to get paid next. You can't predict how many gigs you're going to have in 5 months from now. You never get paid on time, so that creates a huge pressure on your financial abilities, right? Because you don't know how much you can save, and you're constantly having to reinvest as well, because, and I know we'll touch upon music production afterwards, but if you are a producer as well, the amount of investment you need to make into creating your art and to give it the best shot to stand out against that 100,000 tracks, it's a hell of a lot. So I always feel like I'm just constantly, reinvesting whatever I earn back into music, as well as also just, there's always new plugins, always new toys that you want to play and experiment with in the studio. So there's that pressure, and then there's the sort of the lifestyle pressure, which is enormous. Again, this definitely isn't a career path for most people. This is a path where you have to be comfortable, if not naturally a nocturnal person, because of course there are going to be a lot of late nights, and you're touring a lot, and that affects your nutrition, that affects your health habits. So you have to get really quite consistent with knowing how to live and travel, and be healthy on the road and not treat every restaurant like it's a holiday experience, like trying to really find the places that have health at the forefront and asking for those things in your rider as well. So the touring is a massive thing. Of course, the sacrifice to your family and friends, like, you don't, your weekends are work, so you don't really have, you can't really just go to all these kind of like things that your friends might be doing because that's your prime time as a DJ. So for me, I generally only really get one weekend off in a month, because I am tending to sort of work throughout the weekends. And so that's obviously a challenge. And yeah, and then the other things is just, the notoriety of the music industry, no matter what genre, it has a certain reputation for a reason. It is a difficult playing field. The people involved it can be very dirty. It can be very intense. There's a lot of scrutiny. There's a lot of backbiting. There's a lot of just unfairness, and cutting through that again, staying diplomatic, not letting that stuff get to you, not playing that game. Of course, there's ego. There's a lot of people you have to deal with who have ego all the time. There's people you have to deal with, who are your colleagues who might be taking drugs, and that has always been something that's also quite difficult because yeah, I mean, working with people who take drugs, it's a difficult thing because yeah, I mean, I don't think I need to expand on why that's difficult, but it is of course been something that I've constantly had to it's not something that's changed, frankly. It's something that's been a constant, and the mental health that's also involved in this as well. So there's just so many different pressure points that you're thinking about, as an artist, that you have to navigate, unfortunately.
It sounds like you've navigated these challenges really well, so thank you so much for sharing them. Speaking of navigating challenges, you've been involved in Point Blank University, not just as a student, but now as a lecturer, helping others navigate similar challenges in the music industry. What do you enjoy most about being an educator, and what do you teach?
Thank you. Yeah, I teach marketing and branding specifically for people who are into this sort of electronic music space. Point Blank is predominantly known for producing some of the best DJs and producers that have come to their kind of educational space. We've had people like Claude Von Stroke, Nicole Mudaber, lots of really successful artists that have come through those doors. And I like to teach things, that's the module is around marketing and branding, but I really try to weave through a very entrepreneurial spirit through that, because in essence, our students who are coming to us, they might, most likely, a lot of them are at the beginning stages of their journey. So they're really excited, about the creative aspects of being a producer or being a DJ. And that's, of course, taking up a lot of their bandwidth. And then a lot of them are maybe not yet thinking about the fact that, in today's world, they are a brand, and they stand for things, and their audience need to connect to them on a much deeper level. And so thinking about that brand from the beginning is very, very important, because when a business is born, they do sort of sit down, they map out the mission, the vision, who their target audience is, what are the most important channels for them to communicate, how do they want to tell their story. And I think sometimes artists, they don't necessarily think about it like that. And it kind of, and whereas if you can really grasp that from the beginning and own that, then it makes your creativity sort of unwind in a different way. So that's what I teach. And what I love about it is the fact that, again, when I was at Point Blank as a student, I was studying DJing, but the Point Blank has expanded so much since then. I mean, back then we had one campus. Now we have campuses in Ibiza, in India, I think in China, in LA. We have an online school, and we have quite a few competitors as well. So it just shows that demand is constantly growing for this kind of career path. It's now seen as a viable career path. And in fact, when I was there, it was a certificate, but now it's actually a degree, and it's accredited by Middlesex University. So again, you're getting something that is hopefully going to be a really great tool for your future. And yeah, so what I really love and what I feel is like my duty is that, again, 10, 15 years ago, these things weren't there. and you had to figure it all out by yourself. And figuring that out was obviously going through the, the industry and the brutality of it. But also, your network and like who you knew could obviously determine how much as well you were exposed to and could understand about the industry. Whereas now you can obviously find out a lot about this through listening to podcasts or going to university or listening to YouTube and stuff. And I just love giving back a lot of that knowledge that took me so long to absorb and to understand and to really get right. And I feel like it's my duty to help other people in their path with that if they want to be, the world's next best DJ.
That's incredible. Thank you. It sounds like you're super passionate, not just about your music, but about helping other musicians, and that's really admirable. Are there any lessons you've learned along the way that you wish you knew when you were starting out? And if you could go back and change one thing about your journey, what would it be?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think understanding the habits and the importance of that would took me quite some time to really fine tune and dive deep into. Because again, it is quite tempting. You're all around the world. There's so many amazing opportunities and parties, and of course it's a hedonistic lifestyle, and it's quite easy to get caught up in that, especially in the beginning, because it's so stimulating and exciting. So I that's something that I would say to myself, like, really hone that in and develop those habits. And that those habits, they build the foundation also for your own creativity to unfold, because again, when it comes to music production, that is so much around building like really good habits. It's like being consistent, showing up every single day, like having a routine, because you don't know when creativity is going to when the gods are going to give you that creativity, because you can't create a hit record every single time you go to the studio. It's even the world's best musicians, they don't do that, but what they do is they show up every single day. And if they're there every single day, then the 6 times out of 10 that the creative gods kind of choose you, you're there to catch that moment. And so being there every day is very important. And I also probably would also probably want to understand more the importance of being diplomatic, because it can be really frustrating. You deal with a lot of characters, and sometimes you may want to just, like, I don't know, cut them out, or just like not deal with it and not do that. But unfortunately, this industry is really small, and I think it's really important to stay as diplomatic as you can. To a degree. Obviously, if someone's done something really wrong, then obviously you probably want to cut that cord. But sometimes it's not worth really kind of losing a relationship over, because you just never know that you might have to work with those people in the future. So it's just staying diplomatic is important.
I feel like those are really insightful reflections and will be really useful for people listening. So thank you. We've looked back at your career, and I think that now it's exciting and we should look forwards. So let's talk about the projects and ventures you're currently working on and planning for the future. You are now getting involved with the International Music Summit coming up. How does this complement your work as a DJ and a lecturer, and what are you doing with the IMS?
Thank you. Yeah, it's a massive honor to be selected to be part of the curational team at IMS. So just for context, International Music Summit was started in Ibiza just about 15 years ago by Pete Tong and 4 other people. And each one of those people has achieved some great success in the music industry in different sort of lenses. But it was created by those people to really have a voice for the island, and to also create change for the electronic music industry. So every May there's a gathering in Ibiza. The last couple of years it's taken place at Pasha and Destino. And the industry sort of meets, and they talk about the future and the past and the current challenges that the industry is facing. And this guy Ben Turner, who's an absolute legend in the industry, he's achieved a lot, as a journalist, as a artist manager. He manages Richie Houghton and Anna and Samuel Abdulhadi, who are 3 of the biggest names in techno. He's a very, very well sought after and achieved sort of journalist. He's produced dozens of documentaries on dance music. His knowledge is just absolutely incredible. And he approached me to kind of come and co-create the conference with them. So my role is really around um, thinking about what topics, are important to push through, who are the key people that we should be inviting to speak about these topics. And so, yeah, it feels incredibly rewarding to work with people who have defined this industry for decades. I feel like I'm getting the most incredible history lesson from these people, and they really are the top of the game. So the opportunity to work with those people is I'm really really grateful that I've stuck around the industry and never given up. And as a lecturer and as a DJ, I think it's just more of a chance to showcase a lot of the thought leadership, the topics I'm passionate about, and of course meet some really interesting people along the way.
That's super exciting. Thank you for sharing that. You previously talked about electronic music being the thermometer for change and culture, and now you're working with people who have, for the past decades, acted as defining that, and you now have a role in contributing towards future definitions of that. So, what ethos do you want to bring into electronic music, and where do you want to see progress going forwards?
I think there are two areas that progress, for me, I feel are incredibly important. First of all, the streaming model is just really, really creates, unfortunately, a situation where a lot of people can't even make this their reality as a full-time job, because on average it takes a million streams on Spotify to get paid £1,000, of which 50% is probably going to the label. Which tracks even reach a million? Not a lot, not a lot. So the business model behind that is very it's not sustainable. And there's also an energy consumption perspective as well from streaming, and the strain it places on our resources as well on that front. But primarily the financial aspect is just really completely not right. You spend thousands of pounds, thousands of hours developing a track, and you don't make money from that track. What that track gives you, for the most part, is demand. It builds your demand as an artist, as a performer. So that's important. But if we look back at those times when we had CDs, if you sell a CD at £15 and you sell a million of those, you're making a ridiculous amount of money. We're talking about millions of pounds. So where has that money gone, right? There has to be a better way of getting artists paid fairly for their work. And then secondly, I can't sit here and not talk about what it's like being a woman in the industry. Of course, I'm someone who's a person of color, but I'm also quite passionate about the fact that, we don't 2% of music producers are female, which is an astoundingly low figure. And I think the industry doesn't do enough to support people who want to women who want to make this their work. If you think about parenthood, as a DJ, I mean, that is a very, very difficult thing to think about, because at the end of the day, it's a lifestyle, right? And it's a very, very intense lifestyle. And there is so much more that can be done, from promoters creating a safe space for children to come with you as you tour. So having maybe providing childcare facilities when you're touring, maybe giving you a better set time that suits you as a parent. Of course, not just as an artist, but also industry professionals as well. Like, if they choose to go away and become a mum, is there enough support in those companies being done? And right now that there isn't, unfortunately. And so this is something, as an industry, we really need to work on if we are passionate about getting women an equal voice and an equal space in this industry. Because the minute you start reaching your 30s and women start thinking about this, it starts to become something quite difficult to balance. And there are some incredible women who've gone out there and they have achieved that and they've had it all and they've had children and they've managed. But we can't ignore the strain that it's taken either, on their personal lives, on their children. So we have to create, a more supportive environment for sure in that aspect.
Thank you for sharing that. It's super interesting. And I want to now move on to your work as a race car driver. But before we go into the ins and outs of racing, I want to ask you about the motorsports industry because it is another industry that has historically lacked diversity, both in regards to race and gender, but also class and other intersections. How can you talk to me more about your experiences as a race car driver, as a woman, and as a person of color, and how you started your journey in racing?
Yeah, so racing came, around the same time as music, and I always say music is my yin and racing is my yang, and both things sort of for me sort of can't coexist without the other. And the reason that is because as I sort of touched upon, I was bullied quite a lot in my childhood, and music was that form of healing. But motorsports was this form of actually taking out some of that um that some of that aggression and also just basically putting on that helmet, no one really knowing if you or caring if you're a girl or a boy. And it really was about your results and pushing your own self to break your own limits, your own boundaries, and every single corner trying to reduce the lap time and figure out where your limit is essentially. And I just fell in love with this sport when the second I felt stepped into a go-kart when I was really young, but not young enough because in this industry, as you may know, the ones that make it to Formula One, they've started around the age of like 3 or 4, which is crazy because at that age to know you're going to devote your life to become a professional athlete, and as you sort of touched upon their class and things like it's not like picking up a football and going to the park, which is a very accessible thing to do. Going to becoming involved in motorsports, a lot of the time comes from family who have taken you. There's a ridiculous amount of investment because it's not a cheap sport. It's probably one of the most expensive sports in the world. Once you start getting into the competitive leagues of go-karting, it's like £100,000 a season at the age of 12, right? Once you start going into single seaters, you're looking at close to £1 million. And the average statistic is something like around £7 million a family spends before their child gets picked up by sponsors and they start progressing into Formula 3 and Formula 2 and then hopefully Formula 1. So that barrier, whether you're a girl or boy, it is already exists, is a financial barrier. So that was one of the reasons why I couldn't, continue to that highest level. I also have dyspraxia, which is a motor coordination delay, which I was diagnosed with well after I got into my journey of karting. So that once that happened, I sort of kind of knew that I'm not going to make it to the top league, even though I was winning a few championships and races. But it just didn't seem likely. And then of course we have the unfortunate issue of women still not having at all an equal setting in the sport, because if you just look at it today, 2023, Formula One, we do not have a female on the actual team lineup. And the reason I come back to Formula One is because it is the pinnacle of our sport. And so that is the benchmark, of how we measure, like how successful an industry is. And as Formula One is so celebrated for being so innovative. It's constantly pushing boundaries, technology. We can see the innovation in the machinery, but the female aspect of it is still lacking far behind. And now we do have, some initiatives that have come in, because to change this, it really means changing it from a grassroots level. Because if you understand the financial pressures and then you look at a talent pool, already the people that are coming in, if you have 20 drivers in a karting championship, maybe 1 or 2 of them are girls. What 3 of them are going to go on and become 1, 2, and 3, win a championship. What's the chances, obviously, of it being a girl, and then those people progressing to the next league, and then the next league after that? And so you look at the feeder series like Formula 3 and Formula 2, and again, there really are barely any women in that. So it's just the pure, fundamental talent pool that we're working with. And so in order to change that, we need as many women and girls coming into this from the youngest age possible, so that when there is a karting championship, it's hopefully almost a 50-50 split, to make things fairer. And that is partly one of the reasons why we have this inequality. We also have, obviously, a historical stereotype that we're sort of dealing with. There have been some very well-known figures that have unfortunately, not believed that this is even something that women can do. But of course, we are changing that narrative. We have people like Susie Wolf, who has tirelessly worked to change that narrative, and others as well. So it's not going to be in my generation, that someone at my age is going to become Formula One driver who's a female, but hopefully it will be 2 or 3 generations away from happening. And I feel it's got to happen in the next 5 years, that we see a woman in Formula One, and that person is going to face, of course, an incredible amount of scrutiny. So that person who goes in, they can't be in the worst team in Formula One, because already then they're going to get so much negativity surrounding them. So whoever this person is going to be, and hopefully people, they need to be going into really decent championship winning cars. Yeah, and I think people are ready for it. I think the F1 does a lot of surveys, and they share a lot of their results, and the public are asking for this as well. So it's down to the people at the top to create those vehicles for change.
Thank you for sharing that and uncovering some of the misconceptions about the industry and bringing light to the inequalities. Can you please tell me a little bit more about Regents Racing and how you've started this organization that is helping bring more inclusivity into racing as well?
Yeah, so even though I couldn't go and sort of make this my actual professional career as an athlete, when I got diagnosed with dyspraxia at age 15, it was at that sort of pivotal moment when, you're about to start your GCSEs and then your A levels, and all of those decisions, whatever subject you take, the results you get, they are, that is the first step on the ladder towards your career. And at that time, my parents sort of told me to kind of hang up my racing shoes, like with dyspraxia, it's not going to be achievable. And, of course, the financial aspect. But I sort of, instinctively pushed through to get to kind of almost rewire my brain from, let's say, this motor coordination delay that I have. And going on that journey was obviously really difficult. And it required me to roll up my sleeves and work 10 times harder and put in thousands more hours. But it made me face myself. And that is what racing does. It makes you face yourself, because it is about what boundary you can push and what limit you're willing to break. And what I fell in love with more, and I think what my purpose is much more centered around in the motorsport industry, is around how motorsports can impact you as a human being, as a leader. Whether you care about motorsports or not, there are so many interesting lessons that you could take from it, from a leadership perspective. So if you again look at Formula One or other similar championships, it is about the change and innovation of technology. It is about sustaining peak performance, not only for your driver, but for the 1,000 other people that work in that team. Those 1,000 people are the absolute best of the best. How do they maintain that peak performance across 22 different time zones? As DJs, we face that same, sort of issue of like traveling all the time. We have to perform on demand at our absolute best. And busy, CEOs and people who work in the corporate worlds also face some of those same challenges. There's also an aspect of that around sustainability. The sport is constantly uncovering innovations and pushing limits, for technology on the racetrack to create better, more efficient batteries, and all of those things impact other industries as well. And so for me, what I love is that whole journey and what the sports can bring you. And so Regents Racing was really born out of a place. Initially, it was born in university, and it was a society, and it was a place that we all used to come together and really just kind of share this common love of motorsport. Because again, when you're on a road trip, it's so much about bonding. It's so much about, kind of creating, yeah, your community. And it really evolved from there to become this exploration. As the university I went to was a business school, so people were inherently entrepreneurial, and so we were very fascinated about this, and we had a few drivers in our community who are professional race car drivers for Lamborghini and Blancpain and Dakar, and those guys, they went on to become incredibly successful in business, and a lot of it, is because of that discipline they have as athletes, specifically in racing, and how that's impacted their business journey. So, and then me as a woman running it, of course, we do have a lot more women than your average motorsports club would have. I think 40% of our members are women, which is great, because of course me spearheading it, it does create a more sort of let's say more inclusive space. Like I've been in so many situations and environments where you go to a race and women are just seen as part of the picture, or they're treated as they're objectified, and that was never something I wanted to ever create. I wanted to create this as a place where people could connect but also feel safe, and learn and inspire from each other. And hopefully that's what we have achieved, with our little motorsports club.
That's really empowering. Thank you for sharing that. And I wanted to ask you more about the dyspraxia element of everything. So, how would you say dyspraxia has influenced your perception of success and achievement, both on the racetrack and in your business and just in life in general?
Yeah, in the beginning when I got diagnosed, it was more around my teachers feeling like almost like pity, like, oh, let's see if you can get some extra time, because they didn't know that something was actually wrong, but they just always viewed me as a problem child. Because to be in this school, you had to be quite clever. I mean, it's a top 10 school in the country, so if you got in, you were pretty smart. And that meant, in subjects, it's A is the benchmark, right? But getting a B, I mean, getting a C is like a disaster, an absolute failure. And there were some subjects that I just, for the life of me, I just wasn't good at, from science to math specifically. And so they always thought, that I was doing this to be, just like sort of act out. So yeah, they told me to go to an educational psychologist, see if I could get extra time. And then that was when they detected I had this dyspraxia thing. But there wasn't, from that moment, much support. It was like I got some extra time. I got to use a computer in school, because like after some time your handwriting isn't very, very legible. But it was a journey that I had to uncover for myself, and what it actually means on a day-to-day perspective, and how I can work around it. Because of course, motorsports is centered around coordination, but music is as well. And so even learning DJing, it wasn't, even though I'd spent so many years observing and being part of the scene, it wasn't something that came, the actual skill set of it, so naturally to me. It was something that I really had to um really, really go out and learn on a really deep level. So yeah, I think, what I've learned to what I've really learned about this is that it is actually your own superpower. Your brain is wired differently, and that is your superpower, because you see the world in a very different way. Perhaps you create things, maybe the feelings are a bit more, deeper, or just different. And I think it's given me that, more than anything, is it's galvanized me to come out in a very different way creatively, and hopefully just make it my own stamp on things. And yeah, hopefully, you hear so much about creative geniuses. They've had ADHD, or they've had autism, or they've had some people who are neurodivergent. And I think once you can understand what's going on in your brain and navigate around that, the world is absolutely your oyster.
That's really inspirational. And as a dyspraxic individual myself, I thank you for sharing that. You gave a TED talk about dyspraxia. What motivated you to share your insights about your experiences through a TED talk? And how did you come to realize the significance and the gravity of the situation?
I think the TED talk was actually the moment where I realized the significance and the gravity, because the TED talk happened when I was about 27, I think. And I think in the beginning when I got diagnosed, it was because the severity wasn't really communicated of how it impacts your daily life. It was just purely you get some extra time in exams. I didn't really understand the gravity of it. And I think I was almost embarrassed by it, especially for motorsport, because, I then thought, well, if people know about this, they might think I'm like a liability or something on the racetrack. By the way, later found out that Ayrton Senna, and arguably one of the greatest drivers of our entire, history in Formula One, he had a similar motor coordination delay. So it just shows that, really you can defy those limits. But when I was presented with the opportunity to do a TED talk, and I'll just quickly sort of just touch upon that, because you can either apply for a TED talk, and at that point you have to submit a one sentence, like your big idea. What is the idea, right? And then obviously you go away and maybe you get selected or not. For me, the process happened quite organically. Someone in my network reached out to me, actually on WhatsApp. I thought it was a joke. She was just like, "Oh, we have this TED thing happening here in Luxembourg, and the theme of that year was like explore, excite, and we'd love for you to kind of come and do a talk." And because it was so casual, I really didn't even know she was part of TED, because she was working for the Ministry of Education. I didn't know about that other part of her life. But then the email came and it was all very official, and so because I hadn't kind of gone in with an idea and they had approached me, I had to think obviously what the idea was going to be. And it's this huge moment, obviously, because a lot of people want to have a TED talk, and it's almost like the speech that defines you, like for your life and your legacy. And I only had 6 weeks to come up with the whole thing. And I was in 6 different countries in those 6 weeks on some very, very intense work missions. So I didn't really have time, to kind of, some, when you go down that journey of doing a TED talk, like you hear about these people who get speech writers, and, and again, they've had like a year to prepare for this. Like I did not have the luxury of time. And it was also in the Philharmonic Hall in Luxembourg, and it was sold out. So, I mean, the pressure is just enormous. And I think at that moment, I just kind of simply got on with everything with dyspraxia. Like it was almost an imposter syndrome. I didn't really want to think about it. I didn't, and I'd gone away, and between the age of 15 to 27, I'd achieved so much. And I was on this plane in Dubai, and I'd been in Dubai for 48 hours for a race, and I was looking back at these pictures of this race, and it was when that was the light bulb moment basically hit me of what on earth I was going to talk about, because there were so many aspects I wanted to bring into this, from bullying to different things, but it had to have a central theme. And I looked at this picture, and behind this in this picture, I was like in this single seater car. I had this helmet on. Again, you wouldn't know who that person is, because obviously they're wearing a helmet. But behind the car was a hashtag, basically an advert for this tag your campaign, and the hashtag said "Don't crack under pressure." And it was literally this light bulb moment at like 30,000 feet in the air, where I realized that, hang on a minute, if someone didn't know who it was underneath that, they would have no idea that this person has dyspraxia, that they've been bullied, that they're a person of color, they're a woman. And I suddenly realized that, in order for me to basically do a lot of that, and actually it's what the educational psychologist had told me, that to succeed in this really competitive school, and to even just get by for certain subjects, I had already started rewiring my brain to be able to figure out how to be in that classroom environment. And I basically just remembered that conversation, and that was when the topic, which I later picked, which was how to rewire your brain from learning difficulties, and obviously specifically through the lens of dyspraxia. That's how the title came to me. And also, the fact that when you are doing a TED talk, it is about a golden idea that's worth spreading. And I wanted to pick something that hadn't already been talked about much, and that's obviously quite a tall order, because there's so many TED talks out there, and almost everything has been talked about. But actually, when I did my research, dyspraxia, there were like 3 or 4 talks on this, barely any. So I knew that was the right one. And then actually going through that reflection and what that whole thing meant, and writing the speech, that was when I really understood the gravity and what I had maybe been able to do for myself, and more importantly, how I could share that back with people. Because the thing is like, and I've obviously, having gone through it now, like people have come up to me, who've even that day in that audience, people kind of came up to me afterwards and they're like, I think you just uncovered what my son or my daughter or even I might have, because I know I like all those signs you talked about. That's my child or that's me. Um, and and that's fundamentally, what you want to achieve with the TED Talk is like hopefully changing someone's life and helping them to, be inspired and empowered to make a change, either through themselves or with whatever they're doing. And yeah, and that was the whole journey around it, really. And since then, because I've now become a sort of recognized thought leader in that space, yeah, I've had a lot of opportunities, on an educational perspective. Because again, when you have got a neurodivergent condition, I mean, it means that it doesn't mean that you can't be good at maths or you can't be good at science or you can't be a DJ or can't be a race car driver. It just means you have to figure out your learning capabilities and the best way that you can be educated. And obviously, because the education system it is so standardized, um, there is a lot to be said about what needs to change in the environments to help, people succeed, through their own learning profile, really.
That is super interesting, and it sounds like you have helped so many individuals with their struggles and navigating the challenges of dyspraxia. I thought your metaphor with the racing car and the helmet was beautiful. And what it highlighted to me is that it's not just neurodivergent individuals, but it is a representative of everyone, that we all have our internal insecurities and our doubts and our shadows that hold us back. But to the rest of the world, we've got helmets on and people sometimes can't tell. You spoke a lot about managing dyspraxia and dealing with it, but often with something like a neurodivergent condition, you have to come to acceptance that although you can learn to manage your condition so that it suits your life best, you will always have some elements of it. What was that process like for you, and kind of overcoming the shame of being someone with dyspraxia, just learning to love it or accept it?
Yeah, I think when I actually started to achieve the things I wanted to achieve with music and with motorsports, and that was number one, being recognized as someone who is a great DJ and it's not about being recognized, but in a way that, ultimately as a DJ, you're always, you need that audience, you need that connection. That's what you drive and thrive off. And the more and more successful I got, the more I started to feel really comfortable with who I am and what I have and what, and the childhood and everything that I faced, because that is what gave me the resilience and the discipline to persevere. Um, and so, yeah, and same for motorsport, when I found also what my purpose was there, because obviously in the beginning, when you realize, or as you're through that journey, that the goalpost was to be a racing driver, but actually, that goalpost is no longer feasible. But you still want to be on that same circuit or in that same industry, on that same mountain, but you just have a different role. And once I realized that I actually was way more fulfilled having a community and building a community and taking those people on incredible experiences, like things you just wouldn't do in your day-to-day life. Like the things that we get to do are just absolutely incredible. I mean, we've taken our members, blindfolded driving with Land Rover. We've gone to the Nürburgring. We've done so many incredible things, and it's very much value driven. Like we welcome people into our community who we feel match our vibes and our values. And the more that I started to achieve with that, and the more that the community got built, the more I just felt fulfilled and didn't feel any more the shame. And I think that's comes down to purpose, because obviously, you've really got to figure out, your purpose in life, because that no matter what you have, no matter what situations you've been faced with, what card you've been dealt with, the moment you uncover your purpose and you go out and achieve that, you don't even look back. It's like that it's so important every single moment to just be working to that purpose and giving the world that purpose, whatever it is. And for me, that is, of course, music, for it to touch people, to transcend people. It started out for me, experiencing other people's music, and that's what it gave me, was healing in those moments. And that's what I hope to give, with my music. And obviously, with motorsports as well to help people break their own limits. And now dyspraxia is just, because I have worked really hard to help to rewire it as well. It's not something that, it limits me from anything anymore. Like, I just know, like, okay, if I'm struggling with something, it always comes back to what's the core foundation. And maybe I've slipped, maybe I've rushed something. If I haven't understood the core, then I can't really, move any further. So anytime I'm learning something, or I'm just faced in a situation, like, I mean, skiing is a great example, another sport where, again, there's so much about coordination, and I absolutely love skiing. Like, it's so incredible. What an incredible sport. And I'm not really a skier who's out there to be competitive, but like, when you're skiing, it doesn't matter if you're being competitive or not. Like, you are, again, facing all the elements, and you're like, you have to deal with like so many situations of day. You have to be switched on like all the time. And when you have dyspraxia, like, it is a bit more difficult because, again, it's that coordination, it's balance. um but when you get to that flow state, it's like the most incredible feeling, because like you're looking at nature, and it's so inspiring. And again, it's like you against the elements. And skiing is something that most people don't get to do that. If they love skiing, they go like once a year or something for a week, and the first couple of days you're like rusty and you get back to it. And again, dyspraxia, is a barrier, because you're having to get back to that balance point. But again, like, coming back to the foundations, like, oh, maybe I'm not turning the right way because I've forgotten, how I'm supposed to go into that. Or yeah, and it's just like coming back to a foundation, and then it resets you in a way to like come back and kind of build upon, and yeah, advance, hopefully.
That's really interesting. And I loved how you touched on that piece of purpose. Linking to that and linking to all of the things that we've spoken about today, I want to move on to talking about the Mission Makers podcast, a podcast which is in the top 2% globally and provides insight into the mindset and misconceptions of the motorsport, music, and business industries. It combines all of the amazing things that you've worked towards, and is a podcast that I'm proud to say that I co-produce with you now. What inspired you to create the Mission Makers podcast, and how did you come up with the idea of exploring the intersections between music, motorsport, and business?
Yeah, thank you. And we're really thrilled to have you on the team for Mission Makers as well. And for me, the journey around the podcast was one of the things that I trained as in the music industry was as a journalist, and then of course as a music producer, and the marriage of those two skill sets, it leads beautifully to podcasting. And it was 2020, just before the pandemic was about to kick off, and I was in Davos in Switzerland, DJing for a crazy experience tied to the World Economic Forum. And it's the sort of place where you just got to ask yourself, like, how on earth did I get here? Like, and how's my music taking me to this place? And when, like, through my life, I'm always meeting new people all the time, all these events that are going on. And when you tell someone what you do, it's always a lot of questions. There's also a lot of misconceptions that people who might be observing you and might be thinking about. And I always talked about it being my yin and my yang, music and motorsport, and everything that I learned. I just felt like it would be really interesting to create a podcast that actually talks about the success and the misconceptions of what it takes for these specific industries, and then tying it to the context of what's happening in the business world. So on our show, we have 12 episodes, and 4 of them are music guests, 4 of them are motorsport guests, and 4 of them are people from the business world. So it's kind of tying in these stories. And sometimes, we have situations where a music guest is like is really into motorsport, like Carl Cox, for example, one of the world's best DJs, but also owns a racing team, has like loved racing. Or there's lots of interesting producers out there who are like also into the car scene. Or we recently are going to be launching season 4 with Jaime Alguersuari. I know you worked on that episode, but he was a former Formula One Red Bull racing driver who then became a DJ. And just talking about this kind of like interesting niche and this intersection, and like what again, that performance, like we talked about, going through so many different time zones, performing on demand, like, and just kind of lifting the lid a lot on like these industries that most people don't really know what it takes, or how it works behind the scenes. And really just creating a space to talk about that. And that's really how the show was born, just to kind of talk more and uncover the lid. And yeah, we're going into season 4 soon.
That's really exciting. And thank you for sharing your original intentions behind creating the show. In one of your episodes, you touched on how you spent 10 months preparing for the podcast before launching. And as a co-producer, I see how much work goes behind every episode of the Mission Makers podcast. Why did you spend so long in the planning phase? And how has it helped you with the growth and the kind of nurturing of the show as it's progressed?
Yeah, for sure. And so I think, that again comes back down to, purpose and mission, because I don't think you should just go and launch anything blindly. I mean, that you need to have a very specific, very good understanding of why you're doing something, what it is you want to achieve, who do you want to speak to, where is it going to be? Because ultimately, when you become a podcaster, as you well know now, this is something that is part of your life, and it's a very time consuming part of your life, because whether you're talking by yourself or you're interviewing people, there's a lot of work that goes into those episodes. And as you know, one of the businesses I run now is a podcast agency. And for our clients, on the extreme end of the spectrum, we could spend 50 hours producing an episode because of the amount of research that's required. And so, to fit in that time into your life, it's a significant commitment. And there is a science to podcasting. And, a lot of that is consistency, right? Like having an episode every week on a Tuesday at this specific time, like if you look at the world's best podcasters, you know when they're going to release an episode, you expect that. And it has to be at a certain quality. So to get that quality, you need to do a lot of prep work. Because once you're on that bandwagon, you're almost on this hamster wheel and you need to keep up. And for me, having the 10 months to prepare for this was, although I probably had like a head start being a producer, an audio producer, and being a journalist, it was still a new industry, like podcasting as an industry. It was still something I had not yet actually known about, right? So actually understanding the wider lens of the industry, where is it going, what are the drivers, that's all new things you need to learn. And then there was a pandemic along the way, because initially we wanted to film all of our episodes in person, and then we obviously had to navigate that situation. So yeah, I'm really quite happy that we spent that time to really develop and let the mission unfold and create all the things that needed to be created, because then when we launched, we had already pretty much recorded our season. So, and that's the kind of cycle we work on now, is like when a season is airing, we're already working on the next season, and we're already like getting ahead, so that we're not sort of trapped by like, oh no, and we don't have any more content and we need to like go out there and we need to do so, so it's that's part of the reason why we spent a long time, and what we hopefully advocate for all of our friends in the podcasting industry is to create with intention and with thought. Like that is the most important thing, not just for the sake of it.
That's really interesting. And speaking of intention, what are your intentions for the audience? Like, what do you want them to take away from Mission Makers, and what experience do you wish for them to have?
Yeah, I mean, I hope that each episode is almost like a mentorship, for the person who's listening, because when do you get to speak to a Formula One driver and talk about how they became a DJ, and what they learned from being at Red Bull, which is like notoriously one of the hardest teams in the world to race for, psychologically specifically. And how do they bring that into the world of music, and what can we learn through that? Because not every one of us is going to be a Formula One driver. So, what can we take from that learning and that journey? And so being a fly on the wall for those conversations is hopefully what, I want my audience to take away. I also want them to, learn from some of the people who are out there changing the scene, or the industries. What are the crucial things and challenges and trends to be aware of? What are the misconceptions also of success? Because again, if you're a new music producer or DJ coming into this, there's so much to learn and to understand, and the industry is changing all the time. And so it's again like having this thermometer of like, where is the industry, and what is what one of the most celebrated Radio One presenters have to say about the state of the radio industry right now, for example. So yeah, like those are hopefully the conversations that we bring to light, and hopefully the audience enjoys and takes away for themselves and gets inspired and empowered by.
100%. And I will link all of the information for the mission makers in the show notes. I want
Thanks.
to finish by talking about how on the Mission Makers podcast, you always end episodes with the theme of gratitude. What are you most grateful for in this moment?
Thanks. Yeah, no, what am I grateful for right now is actually just having a lot of time. It's the summer and normally I'm just flat out touring and stuff like that, but I've taken the summer a little bit to just kind of go a bit deeper into my production to get ready for this IMS opportunity as well, which is probably already happened by the time this podcast airs. So it's just nice having a bit of time to just reflect and think and just do things. And as you may know, I was in Italy a couple of weeks ago and produced 7 tracks that, again, grateful for being in that moment where like there's been 10 years of hard work, like learning music production. We're now in a state where, we can spend 1 week in a studio and have 7 tracks done, and those tracks coming out, everything I'm writing now is for the future, is for next year. So quite grateful also for that knowledge to finally culminate and kind of let its creativity unfold now at that magnitude of the productions that I wanted to be writing at. So I say those are some of the things that I'm really grateful for.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of your incredible insights. It's been an honor to have you, and it's been an honor to be mentored by you. Thank you for everything. You truly are an empowering woman.
Thank you so much. And I'm really grateful that our paths crossed. I've also learned a lot about you. And one thing we didn't touch upon here, but, a memory I'll always cherish is I took you to your first raving experience, which was so exciting because you saw for yourself like how you can say what that experience was like.
It
But I
was
think, it was, yeah.
it was like a trance. I wasn't expecting to enjoy music without lyrics, but it was honestly incredible to see how just sound and how movement and how everyone was connected and like just enjoying. And it was just very different to a club experience where they're playing like pop music. So I feel very grateful that you introduced me into a new scene as well.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm very I look back at that with some great memories. But yeah, thank you, Mahika, for everything as well. It's been a true pleasure, and I'm really looking forward to where this podcast is going to go.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Empower Sounds podcast. And if you've listened to the rest from this season, thank you so much. If you haven't, I encourage you to go listen to the incredible stories from amazing women from all walks of life. And stay tuned for the next season, which is dropping in February next year, in 2024. In the meantime, if you have any suggestions of who you want to hear from and see, let me know on the podcast Instagram account at Empower Sounds. That's all from me. Have an amazing rest of your day, and until next time.